Look at him. The man who lost everything, no job, no wife, nothing, Jason sneered, raising his glass to his friends. I mean, seriously, what are you even doing here, Ethan, hoping for some charity? A man, once mocked and broken, returns with a vengeance, unveiling a power no one saw coming. As those who ridiculed him fall one by one, they realize underestimating Ethan was their greatest mistake. But we start the video, let us know where you're watching this video. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, Story Store, and please share your thoughts about this story in the comments section. The sharp crack of breaking glass echoed through the dimly lit restaurant as Ethan's fist came down hard on the wooden bar counter. Shards scattered across the polished surface, some skidding onto the floor. A stunned silence followed, the lively chatter abruptly cut off as heads turned toward the commotion. All eyes were on him now, but Ethan barely noticed. His breathing was heavy, his hands trembling with the force of restrained fury. His knuckles had turned white, his clenched fists a silent testament to his rage. And then the laughter came. It was loud, cruel, and piercing. The kind of laughter that gnawed at your pride and made your blood boil. It wasn't just laughter, it was mockery, thick with disdain. Look at him. Jason's voice rang out, dripping with amusement. He sat comfortably at a nearby table, surrounded by a group of men who had once been Ethan's colleagues. The great Ethan Walker, the man who lost it all, no job, no wife, no future. The men around Jason chuckled, raising their glasses in mock celebration. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, willing himself to stay calm. Jason, the man who had married his ex-wife, the man who had delighted in kicking him while he was down. Tell me, Ethan, Jason continued, his smirk widening. What are you even doing here? Hoping someone will take pity on you, maybe buy you a drink? Another round of laughter rippled through the group. Ethan exhaled slowly, his grip on the edge of the counter tightening. They thought he was still the broken man they had left behind. They thought he was weak. They had no idea who he had become. Ethan finally turned, his gaze locking onto Jason's. A slow smirk played at the corner of his lips. Let them laugh. Let them think they had won. Because soon they would learn the truth. Underestimating Ethan Walker was the biggest mistake of their lives. Ethan smirked, shaking his head. You know, Jason, you should be careful who you mock. Life has a funny way of turning tables. Jason scoffed. Oh, yeah? And what, pray tell, do you have that could ever intimidate me? Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he picked up his drink, swirling the amber liquid inside, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes flickered toward the entrance, as if expecting someone. And then she walked in. Sophie Monroe. The moment she stepped into the restaurant, the air shifted. Conversations hushed, heads turned, and eyes followed her every move. She was effortlessly captivating, long, dark waves cascading over her shoulders, a confident stride that demanded attention. Dressed in an elegant black dress, she moved with an air of power and purpose. She walked straight to Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder and pressing a soft kiss to his cheek, her voice smooth as silk. Sorry I'm late, love. Jason's smirk faltered. Confusion flickered across his face as he glanced between Ethan and Sophie. Who is this? Sophie turned to him, an amused smile dancing on her lips. Sophie Monroe, maybe you've heard of me. Jason's smug demeanor wavered as recognition dawned. His eyes darted between Ethan and Sophie, searching for some kind of mistake, some loophole in reality that would make this moment make sense. But there was none. Sophie Monroe, he repeated under his breath. The name carried weight. It was the name of a woman who had built an empire from the ground up, a business mogul who was as ruthless as she was brilliant. Sophie let the silence linger, enjoying the way Jason's arrogance faltered. "I take it you know who I am," she mused, her voice calm yet edged with amusement. Jason swallowed hard, glancing at his so-called friends. They were just as stunned, their earlier laughter now a distant memory. Ethan leaned back, resting an arm casually around Sophie's waist. "She also happens to be my girlfriend." A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Jason's fingers tightened around his glass, his knuckles turning white. "That's impossible," he muttered. "You're lying." Sophie raised an eyebrow, reaching into her clutch and pulling out a sleek black card. She slid it across the table towards Jason. "Believe what you want. But if you're curious, this is my personal business card, Monroe Enterprises, the very company you all admire." Jason hesitated before picking up the card. His breath hitched as he traced the embossed golden lettering. It was real. It was undeniable. "And Ethan," Sophie continued smoothly, "is more than just my partner. He has a stake in Monroe Enterprises. He's been working with me for months now." The weight of her words crushed whatever confidence Jason had left. He had spent the past year mocking Ethan, assuming he was still the broken man from before. But now the tables had turned, and Jason was left grasping at straws. Ethan chuckled, leaning forward, his confidence radiating through the room. "That's right, Jason. The very company you all work for, Monroe Enterprises, belongs to me." Jason's friends, who had been laughing at Ethan earlier, suddenly tensed. The weight of Ethan's words sank in like a cold realization. They weren't mocking just anyone. They were mocking the man who held their fate in his hands. Jason scoffed, though his bravado was starting to crack. "That's ridiculous. You expect me to believe that?" Ethan smirked, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a neatly folded document. He tossed it onto the table, the papers sliding to a stop in front of Jason. "Go ahead, read it." Jason hesitated before snatching the document. His eyes scanned the contents, his expression darkening with each passing second. His hands began to tremble as he reached the final page. "Termination notices," Ethan said casually. "Effective immediately." A collective gasp echoed through the table. Jason's so-called friends scrambled for their phones, their fingers frantically tapping on screens. Moments later, the horror was confirmed. Emails from HR confirming their dismissal. Jason's face turned red with anger. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I already did," Ethan replied smoothly. "You enjoyed mocking me for being jobless. Now, it looks like we have something in common." Sophie leaned in, her voice a velvet whisper. "Next time, be careful who you humiliate." Jason and his friends stared at their phone screens, their hands trembling. One by one, they opened their emails and the truth hit them like a sledgehammer. Termination notices. Every single one of them had lost their jobs. "No, this has to be a mistake," Ryan muttered, refreshing his inbox. But the message remained the same. Effective immediately, their employment was terminated. Jason's face paled, his mind struggling to process the reality. Just this morning, he had walked into work with confidence, secure in his position, believing himself untouchable. Now, everything had crumbled in an instant. He turned to Ethan, his voice shaking with anger. "You can't do this." Ethan smirked, arms crossed. "Oh, Jason, I already did." Jason clenched his fists, his heart pounding. "I'll find another job. You think you can ruin me. You're nothing but a bitter man trying to settle old scores." Ethan chuckled. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about revenge, it's about consequences. Actions have weight. And in this industry, my influence doesn't stop at Monroe Enterprises. He leaned in slightly. You'll find that doors will close before you even knock. Jason's bravado wavered. He had mocked Ethan, never realizing just how far his reach extended. He looked around at his friends, their expressions shifting from anger to fear. Ethan exhaled slowly. I warned you, but you didn't listen. Now, you'll learn what it feels like to lose everything. Jason swallowed hard, for the first time realizing he wasn't the one in control anymore. A year ago, Ethan had nothing. He had lost his job, his reputation, and the woman he loved. Monroe Enterprises had discarded him like he was nothing more than a useless pawn. Jason and his friends had laughed at his downfall, treating him as if he were beneath them. But Ethan didn't break. He refused to let them define him. Instead, he worked tirelessly, turning his pain into fuel. While they basked in their comfortable lives, he was grinding in the shadows, learning, growing, and planning. It was during those dark days that he met Sophie. She saw something in him that no one else did, potential. While others doubted him, she believed. Together, they built something greater than he had ever imagined. Ethan secured investors, formed alliances, and created a company that would rival the very empire that had cast him aside. He had spent months waiting for the right moment, ensuring every piece was in place. He watched as Jason and his friends continued their charade of superiority, oblivious to the storm he was preparing. And now, that storm had arrived. The people who once mocked him were now at his mercy. He had taken everything from them, just as they had once done to him. But unlike them, Ethan had no intention of gloating. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. As he stood watching Jason's world collapse, he didn't feel satisfaction. He only felt certainty. Certainty that he would never allow himself to be weak again. Jason sat frozen, his mind spinning. Just hours ago he had been at the top, surrounded by friends who laughed with him, who shared his confidence. Now, those same friends glared at him with resentment. Their respect was gone. Their admiration had vanished. All that remained was anger, disappointment, and fear. Ryan was the first to speak. "This is your fault, Jason." His voice was cold, accusing. Jason clenched his fists. "My fault? How was I supposed to know?" "You pushed him," Sarah cut in, her eyes sharp with fury. "You mocked him. We all did. But you led the charge. And now, look at us." Jason had nothing to say, because deep down, he knew they were right. They had treated Ethan like he was beneath them, convinced he would never rise again. And yet, here they were, jobless, powerless, while Ethan stood tall, victorious. Ethan watched them in silence, arms crossed. He didn't need to gloat. The truth was clear enough. Jason looked back at his so-called friends, but they had already turned away, distancing themselves from him. He had led them into this, but now they saw him for what he was. A man who had overplayed his hand and lost everything. Ethan had taken it all, not out of spite, but because he had earned it. Unlike Jason, he had built his empire through resilience and determination. And now he had the last laugh. Ethan leaned against the desk, arms crossed, watching Jason and his friends stew in their failure. The room was silent, the weight of their downfall pressing down on them. Then he spoke. "I could offer you all a way out." Jason's head snapped up. His friends, who had been lost in their despair, suddenly looked at Ethan with a glimmer of hope. "A second chance," Ethan continued, "but you'll have to earn it." Jason narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Ethan smirked. "You spent years stepping on others to get ahead. You thought power came from status, not from effort. Now, if you want a future, you'll have to work for it. No shortcuts, no favors. The room fell into silence again. Some of Jason's friends exchanged uncertain glances, while others stared at Ethan, considering the offer. "Why would you help us?" Ryan finally asked. Ethan's gaze darkened. "Help you? Number, I'm giving you an opportunity. Whether you take it or not is up to you." Jason's pride flared. "You think we'd work for you? After everything?" Ethan chuckled. "That's the difference between us, Jason. I learned from my losses. You refused to." He stepped forward, placing a stack of papers on the table. "This is your chance. Sign, and you'll rebuild from the ground up. Walk away, and you leave with nothing." Jason stared at the papers, his pride warring with his desperation. The choice was his. The room was thick with tension as Jason and his friends stared at the contracts before them. The offer was clear. Work under Ethan, start from the bottom, and prove themselves. Some hesitated, their pride clashing with their desperation. Others, seeing no other option, reached for the pen. Ryan was the first to sign. "I'm not walking away with nothing," he muttered. A few more followed, reluctant but accepting reality. Jason, however, refused to move. His hands curled into fists as he glared at Ethan. "I don't need your pity." Ethan smirked. "This isn't pity, it's a lesson. You can either learn from it or keep pretending you're above it all." Jason scoffed, shoving the papers away. "I'll make it on my own." Ethan shrugged. "Suit yourself, but don't come crawling back when you realize how small this world really is." Jason stormed out, his pride intact but his future uncertain. As the door closed behind him, Ethan looked at the others. "Welcome to the real world," he said. "Now, let's see if you can handle it." Those who stayed knew one thing. Ethan wasn't offering a second chance. He was offering a challenge. Those who accepted Ethan's offer soon realized it wouldn't be easy. He pushed them harder than they had ever been pushed before, demanding discipline, effort, and humility. There were no shortcuts, no special favors, only hard work. Jason watched from the sidelines, his bitterness growing with each passing day. He had once stood above them, mocking Ethan's struggles. Now, he was the one left behind. Ethan, however, had no sympathy for him. Jason had made his choice. With Sophie by his side, Ethan knew he had won. Not just against Jason, but against the doubts, the failures, and the people who had once tried to break him. His success was the final word, the proof that resilience always triumphed over arrogance. Without looking back, Ethan walked forward, hand in hand with Sophie, toward a future he had built for himself, leaving Jason and his past behind forever.